Hi guys, how are you doing? It's been a long time since we've met, ever since this unfortunate event occurred. I hope you're all safe at home. Please be careful and follow all the instructions that are being given by the government. We want you to be safe and we want this entire pandemic to get over as soon as possible. Well, we've had interactions with each other. However, the online classes did not happen, all that well. We had some glitches, technical issues, some infrastructure issues at your end. So after, taking all your feedback, I have decided to start making small videos of the course. Fortunately, we have very less left to finish because around 70% of the course was already completed. So what I've decided to do right now is to start making small videos, and I'm going to post them on a daily basis or probably in small steps, and you can go through it. So there is no problem of like coming to the class at a particular time. At your convenience, you can download the video. When you don't have internet connection, you can wait for some time, or take the video offline and then look at it. Probably you can go through it more than once or twice and understand the topic that I am covering. And if you have any problems, you can directly write all the issues or any problems or doubts that you have in the comments on YouTube. What I have planned to do is I can take all those doubts and create a video and clear those doubts for you. And other than that, we can also try and communicate with each other on WhatsApp or Facebook. If you really need to interact with me, you can just drop in a message on WhatsApp saying that, sir, I want to talk to you. You can always do that. So are you all ready for it? So the first thing is we need to be geared up to learn in this unfortunate time. Like I know it's been a lot of problem all across the country. People have started seeing that the entire life has changed around them. So at this difficult times, we need to take something positive out of it. So this is the time where you can do something very creative which you always wanted to do. Read a lot of books, try to learn new technologies, because the internet and the mobile communications and everything is still on. So what I have planned is I'm going to start making those videos from today, and I will post it for you on the group so that you can download it whenever you're free and then go through it. Now before we start, I would just want to give you a brief recap of the topics that we have covered in the last chapter. Now before we took off from the classes, we covered inheritance. So what are the topics that we covered on inheritance? I'll just like to go through it before we hit the next chapter, that is polymorphism. So are you guys ready for it? So let's go. Okay, the last chapter that we completed, which I'm just going to briefly go through it, is inheritance. So what are the topics that we have already studied in inheritance? The reason why I'm doing a brief recap of inheritance is because this is very important for the next chapter, which is polymorphism. Now polymorphism cannot take place without inheritance. So the underlying principles of polymorphism is inheritance. So what are the things that we studied in inheritance? First thing, I discussed that inheritance is called as an as-is relationship, and it is the relationship between two classes, right? And it's more of a design approach. So inheritance is more important for designers. The implementation of inheritance using C++ is very simple. However, the complications of inheritance is when the designer starts looking at the classes and identifies that which classes would be related under this relationship of inheritance. So inheritance can be carried out in two ways. One is using the public inheritance, the other one is by using the private inheritance. We also discussed the actual use of the protected access specifiers when it comes to inheritance. Now, protected access specifier is the same as private when the classes are declared independent of any relationship. However, its actual use is defined only when there is a relationship between inheritance, and that has been discussed in the class. We have also touched upon how the constructors behave when the classes are inherited, and we touched upon delegation, which is not an as-is relationship, but it is called as a has-is relationship, or the reverse, it's known as a part of relationship. So this is basically, we talk about the whole object and the part object here. When two classes are related using inheritance, one of the class is called as a parent class and the other one is called as a child class. Now there are different names for the same thing. For example, the parent class can also be called as a superclass, or for that matter a base class, whereas a child class can be called as a derived class or a subclass. The other question that comes to the mind is, how exactly is this concept of inheritance important to object-oriented programming? And as I have told you in the class, just a revision again, that inheritance brings about code reusability. In other words, it can help you write lesser code and make the program more flexible and extensible. Now this slide basically tells you that we need to have a minimum of two classes if we need to incorporate the relationship of inheritance. Now the class which already exists is called as a base class, and the new class that we derive out of the base class by inheriting all its properties is called as the derived class. Now an important property to note here is that the base class do not know anything about the derived classes. Another way to look at it is the base class can only look upwards. That means the derived classes are downwards and the base class has no idea about the class which is inheriting from it. Now the derived classes can access the members of the base class. That means the derived classes always look upwards and can see anything on the top, whereas the base class cannot see any members or any classes below it. Well, you are aware of the syntax for inheritance, and it's very simple in C++. You just need to use a colon along with an access specifier. So the derived class is the new class. You need to specify what kind of inheritance I'm trying to do, whether it is a public inheritance or a private inheritance, along with the base class from where the inheritance is taking place. Now, if no access specifier is specified while writing the syntax for inheritance, the default is taken as private. Now, this is a general case. If you don't write any access specifiers while declaring members, it is also taken as private. Now, the next question is, what can we put the access specifier as private? Yes, you can, but both private as well as protected are the same here. So there is no difference in private inheritance or protected inheritance. They are the same. But a public inheritance is different from a private inheritance. And you all know it very well because we've had extensive discussion on this in the class. So just to give you a quick review of what public inheritance is. So if you are inheriting a derived class using public inheritance, then all the base class members, irrespective of whether they are private or public, are inherited in the same access levels. What I mean to say is, if you have a member variable or a member function in the base class declared as public, when it is inherited, the same member variable or a member function in the derived class is also public. Similarly, if there is a private member in the base class, the private member will be derived under public inheritance as a private member even in the derived class. So if you look at an example on the left, you have class A, which is the base class, and class B, which is derived class, and we are doing public inheritance here. And in the base class we have a public variable which is A. Now according to the rules that we've just discussed, when this public member A is inherited in class B, it will come down as public itself. Now the fact, if there is a public member in your class, you can directly access from the main. So if you look at it, you have b dot a is equal to 20. Now this is possible because A, which is public in the base class, also gets derived in class B as a public variable, and that is why you can access it directly from the main. However, if you look to the example on the right, in this example we have A not as a public member variable but as a private member. So if you have a private member, it gets inherited as a private member in the derived class. So if you have a private member in a derived class, so a private member, according to the normal rules of a class, you cannot access a private member directly from the main. So how do we access it? We need a public member function through which you can access the private member. So we have defined a public member function, void show. Through that void show, we are accessing the private member variable, which is A. So you can see A is equal to 9. We are accessing it inside the void show method or the function. So from the main, direct access, for example, the object b dot a is not allowed. However, b dot show is allowed because show is a public member function, and through show A is accessed. Okay, so now what's with private inheritance? Now in private inheritance, we can think about two scenarios. One is when your base class members are public, and the second scenario when your base class members are private. Now when you have the base class members as public, it's quite simple. All the base class members which are public, when they are derived to the derived class, the public specifier, access specifier, changes to private. That means all the public members of the base class will become private in the derived class, which means that you cannot access any public member of the base class directly through an object of the derived class. So how can you access? So in this case, you must use a public member function of the derived class to access the public member function of the base class. Now this is quite simple, but what is tricky is when you have the members of the base class as private, then what happens? So let's look at the second scenario. Now, when you have the members of the base class as private, you basically get a double layer of security.